Hey everybody, Pastor Vern with the daily update for Wednesday, June 24th, 2020. Um, as we continue on, I gotten some suggestions again lately about what we could talk about in our daily updates along with the news from the churches. Remember, we want to continue to lift up that we will be meeting, weather permitting, in the park in Belgrade and in the lot across from the manse in Fullerton on Sunday morning at Belgrade 9:45, Fullerton at 11, and if all goes well, we will be back into our buildings on July 5th at our regular worship times. That would be St. Edward at 8:30, Belgrade and Cedar Rapids 9:45, and Fullerton at 11. With some changes, with some social distancing, with some things that will help to keep the most vulnerable of us safe, and also with the suggestion that the most vulnerable of us, evaluate your risk tolerance before you come out to worship. We will do everything we can to accommodate you. Once again, we don't want to have concerns that we're not following the protocols that will allow us to stay open and have worship. So please review the letter that you got. And, those are some things that we're going to have to do for a while. I anticipate possibly changes after we get started and see how things work. Well, the suggestion I had today was to talk a little bit about the women in the Bible. They says that the note comes and says, "Hey, Vern, what about some of the women in the Bible? We don't hear about them so much." Well, and that's true. It was a patriarchal society. We don't hear about the women as much. And so I got to looking up some things in some of my reference materials, and I came up with something I thought was quite interesting. We're going to do a little bit of a series here on the women of the Bible, and maybe some of them that we're not as familiar with. We're very familiar. We're talking about Sarah now in the Old Testament readings during our worship. We're familiar with, of course, Mary and Mary Magdalene and Mary and Martha. We got a lot of Marys going there. And some of those folks that are more prominent in the scriptures. But I think we're going to look at some, maybe the lesser known women in the scriptures and see what their contributions to the whole process of God's plan has been. And today we're going to start with a very unique group. Even though they are the largest group in the Bible, they also are unique because we don't know their names. And especially the women of the Old Testament. There are hundreds of thousands, probably hundreds or thousands of women in the Old Testament that are not named, that are part of the story. There's a lot of prominent stories even where women had a very strong influence on what was going on, but we still don't know their names because they made those contributions through their deeds without being named. Sometimes it's kind of unique because sometimes we'll know their daughters' names, sometimes we'll know their mother's names, but we won't know their in particular names. And the women have, even though their role has maybe not been elevated to where it should be in a lot of our teaching and so on, women have always made a tremendous contributions in the work of God on this earth. In many ways, a lot of them had to do with, a lot of times it was influence among the patriarchal leaders of the time period that they used their influence to help to mold some things, maybe take some of the men's egos down a notch so that they can see the reality of what God is calling them to do. I think we see that that happen several times in the Old Testament. Sometimes we see it happen in our own families. Well, you got to think about these women. They've got their place in history in the scriptures, but yet we don't know their names, and they were very, very important. I'm going to start out with Noah's family. Noah has got the ark built. We know his sons' names as they carry on the human race after the flood is over, but we don't know their names. We know there was a wife and there was a daughter for each son, but we do know something about them that we don't think about. The fact that they were on the ark means that they were very righteous people and believed in God and would not fall into the evil of the world, that they would not walk away from their God in order to be a part of a society that has put God in the background. They were equally as righteous as their husbands in order to get onto that ark and to have the opportunity to repopulate the earth. And it's kind of an amazing thing when you think about their contribution and what little credit they get for it. But their hearts had to be right in order to be on that ark and to avoid the floodwaters. We talk about Jephthah's daughter. She, the story, you have to look it up and kind of read about it, but the story is that her father had made a pledge and against his daughter's life, and when it didn't work out the way that they'd hoped, she was willing to give her life that her father was not dishonored. There's a lot more to that story, but that's kind of the base of it. She was a very honorable person, that when a promise was made in the eyes of God, that it was going to be upheld. There's some others that maybe are kind of notable. There's the wives and the mothers of prophets. Oftentimes we get this little glimpse of either the mother or the wives of the prophets, either antagonizing them a little bit to get out and do what God has told them to do, or encourage them to get out and told what they are to do. And it's kind of an amazing story in some aspects that they were called to sometimes push the men along so that they would get the work done that God had called them to do. And sometimes we don't even think about that, but in 1 Samuel, there's even a witch that's mentioned as part of the unnamed women in the Bible. And, it goes on, and I think that maybe this is a place where we could spend some time and gain a lot of knowledge by what the women of the Bible were willing to do in order to fulfill God's mission. There's just uncounted numbers of women who had played these important roles, and even though they didn't have their names recorded, they are people of extraordinary faith. And that's just the Old Testament group that we're kind of talking about tonight or today. And it would, some of them are names that you'd be familiar with because they're names that have come into common use over the years, but maybe you don't know their stories. I tell you, why don't you take a few minutes someday and just say, okay, let's look at a few of these passages where there's unnamed women in it, and see what their contributions to the scriptures are. All right, we're going to start with some named women tomorrow. It's going to be I think it'll be kind of fun to delve into the contributions of some of the lesser known women in the Bible and see what a faith base they were in their homes, in their communities, and in their relationship with God. All right. Everybody, take care of yourselves. Watch out for others as best you can. Stay safe. Remember that you are loved, that you are blessed, and keep the faith. See you later.